Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com. WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.
Hi, I'm Chelsea DeCane-Jarabic, audience strategist for the Cap Times, and I'd like to welcome you to this year's Cap Times Idea Fest. This is our 4th annual event, but for the first time, we're presenting the festival virtually. Our theme this year is 2020 Changes Everything. With the COVID-19 pandemic, its effect on the health, education, and economic well-being of our community, as well as the calls for change from the Black Lives Matter movement, there is a lot to talk about. This year's lineup is our best yet. We believe Idea Fest has grown into a signature event on the Madison calendar. It is also an important showcase for the Cap Times, our locally owned and century-old news publication. If you're not already, we hope you'll consider becoming a Cap Times member. As a member, you'll have access to special Idea Fest programs, plus benefits throughout the year. You'll also be supporting an independent and trustworthy local media source at a critical time. Find the details online at membership.captimes.com. I'd like to thank the Burrish Group at UBS, which is the presenting sponsor of Idea Fest and has been with us since the start, as well as our other numerous sponsors. So please enjoy this session of Idea Fest. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Falk. I'm a former appointee of President Obama to the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm a former Dane County executive for 14 years. Before that, I was an environmental lawyer who started out over 40 years ago fighting coal and nuclear plants. The words climate change were not then in our vocabulary. But today, climate change is often called the most compelling issue of our time. The very life of our planet as we know it is at stake, with those hurt most being those already the most disadvantaged of us. Unlike preventing a pandemic where there is a little ability to prevent a new virus from occurring, catastrophic climate change can still be avoided if we act and we do enough now. Yet within that compelling need to act, there are many important questions about what are the next best steps for which there are many differing views, such as, should people work on changing those who are in political power so the laws can be improved? Or should we focus on organizing those most harmed by climate change so they have a stronger voice in policymaking? Or such as, is it better to focus on the local level, or the state level, or the federal level, or the global level, or all at once? Many more questions to address in this panel. With COVID precautions, instead of engaging with what I know is a very knowledgeable and expert set of listeners out there listening to this panel, we are in a studio with social distancing and masks. We will try to speak clearly, but we will miss the give and take from our listeners, although some of you have kindly sent questions to me ahead of time, and I have worked them into the list of questions to pose to our terrific panel here. And we have a terrific panel here, so let me introduce them to you now. Greg Nemet is a UW professor at both the Nelson Institute and the La Follette School of Public Policy. He is the lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and his book, How Solar Energy Became Cheap, was awarded the inaugural World Citizen Prize in Environmental Performance in 2019. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks. Great. Well, the first thing I'd say is that a lot of things are moving in the right direction, and I think a lot of people don't get that, how many good things are happening and how much ground for optimism there really is. The second thing I'd say is that we need all of that to happen much faster than it's already happening, to get things to move to real scale so that they make a real change to our energy system and make a beneficial impact on the climate. And the third thing is that this is really the challenge of our time, and I think people do get that. And it's surprising how people think that, in general, that voters don't care about this or that people are not activated. But when you look at the polls, people really do get this, and I think that is another source of optimism for me.
Well, optimism is something we need these days, and we're going to come back to you so you can reassure us of why we should be more optimistic than some of us are feeling. But let me introduce our second panelist, and that's Madeleine Para. About a decade ago, she found the Citizens Climate Change Lobby chapter in Madison, and then a year later began a 350.org Madison chapter. But since 2013, she has been a leader with the National Citizens Climate Change Lobby staff, where her job is to make sure that volunteers nationwide have the knowledge and the tools they need to advance climate solutions. Welcome, Madeleine.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm really glad to be here today. So Citizens Climate Lobby is pursuing a bipartisan federal legislative strategy to address the climate crisis. And we're able to pursue that strategy with such focus precisely because there's other groups that are working in the other areas on all the many things that need to be happening. And really, the sooner we all reach our goals, the better. So I'm a former Madison teacher, in addition to the other things you said, who joined the Act 10 protests from day one. And when I first got concerned about climate change, I explored multiple ways to work, including with the Sierra Club. And I was part of the first round of civil disobedience against the Keystone XL pipeline. So I really appreciate the Sierra Club and 350.org and all the work at the county level. But seeing the left form such a large coalition on Act 10 and still lose most of its fights with Walker, because of that, I found myself drawn to an approach based on bringing the left and the moderate right together, because success there would be a game changer. So I imagine that a bunch of people listening to this might think I'm crazy to be doing that at this point. But I'll just say that I think it can be satisfying to open a dialogue rather than fight. And I think that somebody has to take this approach. And fortunately, I do have a lot of company in case the left doesn't achieve or keep the strength that it needs in order to go it alone. So that's how I ended up doing what I do these days.
Well, you posed one of the really interesting dilemmas about how different organizations may choose to operate. And so thank you for your candor and effort, and looking forward to coming back to more detail on this.
Thank you.
But now let me introduce Elizabeth Ward. She is the director of the Wisconsin chapter of the National Sierra Club, where she leads hundreds of volunteers to move us off fossil fuels with very effective strategy that has eliminated a number of coal plants in our state. Thank you. And with a positive vision and efforts toward a very clean energy economy. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm also really excited to be here, part of this conversation. I agree that we need every single person involved. With 10 years left to fight climate change, we need everybody working wherever they are at whatever level works for them. But we need to make sure that people that are most impacted by climate change or by fossil fuel projects, who are also the people who have been most impacted historically as well, are at the table and part of the conversation and the solution as well.
Well, you can see now we're teeing up to the local government, and we're so grateful to have Joe Parisi here with us today as well. He is the Dane County executive since 2011, when I left that job in his terrific hands. He established the County Office of Energy and Climate Change and has produced a climate change agenda that he is advancing each day. Everything from county investment in solar farms to conversion of landfill methane gas to clean fuel. And I know there is a long list that I hope we hear some of today. Welcome, Joe.
Kathleen, it's really great to be here. I appreciate it. And thanks to Cap Times and Idea Fest and the sponsors for making this forum possible. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking about, what we can do and what we have done on a local level, because we like to focus on what we call the art of the possible. There are things we can't do on the local level because we don't have the political power to do it or the authority, but there's still so much we can and do accomplish. And so I'm always excited to talk about what we're doing in Dane County and hope that other communities see this and feel free to use our efforts as a template to move their climate change efforts forward. So thanks. I look forward to the conversation.
Well, now, audience, you know who our terrific panel is. Let's put them to work. And let's start out at the global level. That's where Greg has really made a terrific impact, and why you just a few minutes ago heard him express some hope.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with what's been my experience with writing a book about solar energy and traveling around to different countries to understand how that happened. And then with my current work with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is meant to provide objective advice and science to the United Nations for international climate decision making. And the big surprise that's come out of the book, but especially now working with the IPCC, is how far we've come with some really key technologies, with how wind power has become cheaper and getting more widely adopted, how solar power has come down in cost by a factor of 10,000 over the long period, and where batteries are doing kind of a similar type of thing, which allows us to do something that wasn't possible even in the recent past, which was try to electrify and make transportation low carbon. And that's all been a surprise. And one thing we do with the IPCC is we've got hundreds of pages of science that we're pulling together, but then we pull together what are the key messages. If we had to boil it down to just a few things we'd say to policymakers, that point is probably one of the top 5 points now, because it keeps coming up over and over. It's actually easier now than it had been 5 years ago when the last report was published to think about decarbonizing our energy system. And you can see countries stepping up to do that. So just last week, China made a plan to get to zero carbon by 2060 and peak by 2030 in terms of their emissions. California came up with a rule last week to make it illegal to purchase internal combustion engine, a gasoline vehicle, after 2035. We're seeing local utilities make similar types of plans. So all of this is feasible now, and it really wasn't feasible in the same way. There was a lot more talk of sacrifice and constraining economic growth if we had the same conversation 5 or 10 years ago. And now it's much more about, well, one, we need to do this, but two, there's all these opportunities that come from electrifying our transportation system, thinking about the controls, the companies, the people, the jobs that would create. And there's evidence for that now too. You can see there's 300,000 people working in the solar industry across the country. That's where new jobs are coming up. And so there's a lot of reason to be optimistic that this transformation is not all about sacrifice. There's definitely hard work involved. There's definitely investment that'll be required. There's definitely changes to the way people do their daily life that'll be happening. But a lot of them, and to my point, I think most of them will have these co-benefits of making life more enjoyable, of making people healthier because they're not breathing in particulates, or you don't have kids going to the hospital with asthma because we've got coal-burning power plants around. And so all of those things are happening. And the other thing that comes out of that is we just heard from Mr. Parisi about local action now is more feasible than it was in the past, because now we can think about, well, we could electrify our local transportation system and we could make some of these decisions, whereas in the past that would have had to come from large companies or federal government mandates or things like that. So there's a lot more ability because of these technological changes to do things that are meaningful at the local level. But we do need to get going on them. As you said, there's really 10 years to not solve the problem, to make a really big dent in it and get things moving in the right direction. So that's what our job to do is. And the other thing I'd say is, I just mentioned this in my premise remarks, the polling now is pretty impressive in terms of how many people believe that global warming is a problem. It's like 73% of Americans. 68% say the government should be doing more. There's about 50 million people, so this is like, a quarter of adults, that think that this is an extremely important issue to them. It's sometimes called an issue public. And so this is polling right in between people that are really strong motivated by gun control and people that are really strongly motivated by abortion. It's right in the middle of those two. It's a really high profile issue. And so to think, as in the past, that people say, well, climate change is kind of a luxury good that we do when the economy is doing well, and we'll think about that if we really need to, but otherwise we have to think about jobs. It's not really like that. There's much more connections to things like health, like natural disasters, and then the opportunities that come from doing something about climate change than in the past. And so I think we've got technology in our direction. We've got a lot of people behind us now. We've got these very activated people that we think of as issue public people. And then we've got the youth as well. And I think those are things that weren't really intense and in a big way happening 5 years ago that now are. So that's what makes me optimistic about doing something about it.
So as I mentioned earlier, I started out 40 years ago fighting the proposal of a whole lot more construction of coal plants around the state. And I'm so grateful that now we have successive organizations like the Sierra Club who've gone to bat to shut down those plants. But that's taken 40 years. So my question, Greg, is, given what we have to do, is 40 years enough, or does 40 years really need to be 10 or 20? And when we see all these goals being set for the year 2035, it looks like a long ways off.
Yeah, and there's evidence if you look at the energy system and how it's changed in the past. It does tend to happen very slowly. But then one thing I've been doing for the IPCC now is look at these cases where things have happened quickly, where countries have decarbonized quickly, or new technologies like LED lighting, for example, gets adopted quite quickly in places. There's countries in the world like Norway where electric vehicles are really getting adopted very quickly. And so what we need to do is to take more of those examples and apply them in other places. But there's certainly plenty of evidence to show that if we want to, we can make these transitions quite quickly. And I think what we will see is people moving up these dates so that China's 2030 peaking, there's pretty good evidence that that's going to actually happen in 2025. And California has this rule for renewable electricity. They've kept moving more stringent and earlier their goals for that. So I think that's the movement we need to see, and that's what we are seeing. And so I actually think that a lot of these goals are somewhat distant, but as we start working on them, there tends to be a preference to make them even more stringent and have them happen earlier. And as we see more and more models where that works, where it's not just affordable, but it's desirable because it creates opportunities for companies and workers, I think that's what will drive a lot more of this as well.
Well, we're going to switch now to Madeleine, who kind of laid her cards on the table when she did her introduction. I appreciated that. She's been working hard on the federal level to get a carbon tax.
Correct.
As one of the key vehicles to force the market to recognize the price of what we are all doing right now in creating the climate change crisis and to move us to cleaner energy. So what will it take to make this happen, Madeleine, and how likely is it to happen?
So thank you, Greg, for all those great and hopeful things you said to set a context. I really agree with that. And I think a carbon tax, Kathleen, is truly one of the things that can help to accelerate the change that we need. So let me tell you just a little bit more about that focus of citizens' climate lobbies. Well, first of all, we chose to work on Congress not because it's easy, but because local government and individual actions can't have the same scale of impact. And US legislation would move the international context forward tremendously. We chose to focus on a carbon tax with a monthly check to all households for two overall reasons: science and durability. So as a science-based organization, we decided that in addition to listening to climate scientists about the problem, that we should listen to economists about the solutions. And economists are almost as united in their thinking, in their support for carbon pricing as the climatologists are in their analysis of the problem. And a price on carbon is the choice by far of economists. So the common theme across all kinds of carbon pricing is that what you do is you drive down emissions by making it more and more expensive to burn fossil fuels. But then the devil's in the details, of course. So for example, a price on carbon can include cap and trade, and I don't support that.
You want to explain that just so make sure all our listeners know what you're talking about?
So with cap and trade, you put a cap on the amount of emissions that can be burned by your biggest emitters. You target some emitters, but not all fossil fuels that way. And you ask them to buy permits in order to pollute carbon pollution. And you have a market where you trade it, and you often have a program where they can offset their emissions through those permits. So the problem with that is that it's very easily gamed when you make the rules for it, and you have to select who has to participate and who doesn't. In contrast, we like a straightforward carbon tax with, because that's transparent and it's applied to fossil fuels everywhere they're used as soon as they enter the economy. So the proposal that we have and the bill that it's enacted in, that sets a target of 90% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2050, and it tracks really closely with the IPCC's recommendations for staying below 1.5 degrees centigrade. So it's very, very effective. And it would go actually far beyond the Clean Power Plan, which President Obama worked so hard to get enacted and we weren't able to do. So durability is the other reason that we are focused on that legislation to enact a carbon fee with a monthly check to all households. And we don't want to put a program in place that takes years to implement and can be undone by a hostile administration in some future election cycle. So we're way behind in dealing with climate change. So we need to get this moving. Legislation is harder to undo than regulations, as we've seen with President Trump. And a market-based approach that attracts Republicans to the table and Republican support would be more durable than passing regulations or legislation over the vehement objections of Republicans. Well, that monthly check to us is key to durability because basically when you return an equal share of the revenues to all households, that check builds popular support. It limits the amount of new government programs and regulations that are anathema to the right. And it equalizes, it makes it so that the poorest people and the moderate income folks don't pay more out than they receive in increased costs than they receive in that monthly check. So it protects the most vulnerable in that way. Just an example, checks are popular with the public. In Alaska, they've had an annual dividend from the Alaska Permanent Fund for years, and that gives everybody there in that state a share of the revenue from the state's fossil fuels. And there's no politician on the left or the right that will touch that up there. So that's durability, done right. Done right, and it has to be done right. A carbon tax can effectively lower emissions, it can protect the poor, and it can last for the years that we need to get this transition done. So that's what's embodied in the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividends Act, HR 763. It has 82 co-sponsors in the House. That's more than any current or previous carbon pricing bill. Yes, I think we can get it passed. I would have liked to pass it already, as everybody here would have liked to meet their goals already. But I do see things changing and political will building in the polling and things that Greg talked about that would enable that to happen. So
elections matter, is that what you're saying?
Elections do matter, and citizen participation does matter. The way Citizens Climate Lobby gets so much done is that we have very engaged, passionate chapters and members in almost every congressional district in the country, and they work to build support in their community, and they meet regularly with the members of Congress and their staff. So for example, here in Wisconsin, we have 24 chapters. We've gained endorsements for either the proposal or the bill itself from 19 local units of government, including, thank you, the Dane County Board of Supervisors, the 350 chapter in Madison, and the Madison and Milwaukee branches of the NAACP. So our members, they are regularly engaged, and they're really fun to work with, too.
Are we getting some of the Republican votes that we need in Congress?
So there is Republican support. It is not, with one exception, it is not public support at this point. it is very hard to be a Republican member of Congress and go against President Donald Trump. Coming back to elections matter, my mask. The most telling thing polling-wise that is going to push the Republican Party in our direction is younger Republican voters. There was one survey that I love to quote because the support among Republicans under the age of 40, which is divided out from the general Republican population, for this concept of carbon dividends was like 75%. It was almost as high as the Democratic support overall. That's the people that are going to push the Republican Party in the right direction on this.
Well, speaking of pushing, let's turn to Elizabeth here.
Yeah.
She is on the ground getting pushed every which way but Sunday, right? Where are we on both your missions of shutting down the coal plants but creating clean energy jobs? Where are we in Wisconsin on that right now?
Yeah, well, I would say I agree with Madeleine that we're running out of time, but I also agree with Greg that we're seeing good momentum. So that's great. We have shut down, I think, over half of the coal plants in the past decade. And this year alone, we've seen 2 coal plants, one by Dairyland Co-op and one by Alliant Energy, be announced that they'll be shutting down within the next 2 or 3 years. And Governor Evers has pledged to transition all the state-owned coal plants now off of coal. So we are seeing progress, but it's probably not fast enough. And we're seeing that progress made because we are seeing people come out of the woodwork everywhere across political lines saying, I don't want this air pollution in my backyard. I want my kids to have a livable future. And that, I think, is causing as much change as anything else. I think with such limited time to figure this out, we can't count on one policy or one level of government or one industry to be what stops this. We need everybody working at every level, whatever they're most interested in, to help push the solutions forward. The great news about that is that we have a place for you in this movement, no matter what you're interested in. If you're a storyteller or an artist or a data cruncher or a phone banker, whatever it is you like to do, there's a place for you to make progress, and we're seeing that happen. And I think I'm optimistic as well that we can make this happen. Things are changing and more people are getting out in the streets. We're not only seeing that their opinions on climate change are changing, but their willingness to take action based on that is changing. Unfortunately, because we have a pretty big problem with money in politics, we're not seeing our legislators mirror that same willingness or drive to take action. So we just need to push harder, and if that means we need to work on industries, that's what we have to do. We have to work across the board. And while we're talking about the shift to clean energy, which is happening pretty quick, I would say, in especially the electricity side, unfortunately, we're also seeing continuation to keep going in the wrong direction. So this year, we have a proposed gas plant that the Public Service Commission and DNR will be deciding on. We have a proposed new oil.
Can you hold right there? What's that? You want to explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So it's a gas plant proposed in Superior. It's called the Nemet Trail Energy Center. But while we need to be moving to clean energy, we're seeing utilities understand they have to get off coal, but still try to reach for another fossil fuel instead of moving towards clean energy, which is what we need. We're seeing Enbridge, an oil pipeline company that already has 5 pipelines in this state, moving 20%, the equivalent of 20% of the U.S.'s oil consumption through Wisconsin already, propose a new oil pipeline segment and lay the groundwork in Minnesota to build a second new pipeline in Wisconsin. And we're seeing proposals to expand highways, which induce traffic, leading to more emissions, and don't actually even do anything about congestion. So it's not enough. Unfortunately, while we should be discussing which type of solar panels we put where, we're still having to make sure we're fighting these projects, because once they get built, the owners of those companies are going to expect them to be running for 20, 50 years, and we don't have time for that.
So, ask the same question I did of Madeleine, who's slugging it away at the federal level. What gives you hope here at the state level, given the makeup of who's in power now on any of these challenges you've described?
Yeah, well, certainly the biggest thing that gives me hope is I am so fortunate to work with hundreds and thousands of people on the ground, volunteers and leaders, who are devoting huge chunks of their life and their free time to stopping climate change. And that's seen across the country, across the globe. So I think, and all of us here today, right, if we're all willing to do this, there's no way we can't do this and bring it together. And I think we are seeing progress. And I think one of the great things is we can work outside of the legislature, whether that we have a great governor who pledged to get us to carbon-free electricity. We can work through his administration and through him. We can work directly with the utilities to get them to move off of coal. And we can wait until the legislature catches up to us.
Well, speaking of catching up, before we turn to County Executive Parisi, we're going to pause just for a few moments, so that the Capital Times can give great credit and appreciation to the sponsors who made IdeaFest possible. So we'll be back in just a moment.
Cap Times IdeaFest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Parisi Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.
So welcome back. We just paused at the challenges that are being faced at a global and a federal and a state level, but that hasn't stopped Joe Parisi from moving forward on a local level. Joe, you must have adopted the Nike slogan, "Just do it," because that's what you are. And tell us what you're doing.
Well, thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, first of all, I'm incredibly fortunate to be the executive of a county full of people who care deeply about environmental protection and who really get it when it comes to climate change. And so this community is 110% supportive of the efforts that we in county government have taken. Now, I happen to take over this post from an executive who also cared deeply about the environment. Kathleen, you were a person, you had so many environmental initiatives. One of your most impactful was one of your final, which was bringing together the partnership that created our first local manure digester, which in addition to having incredible benefits for our lakes cleanup efforts, is a powerful greenhouse gas fighter because it takes manure from cows, it puts it through a digestion process and takes that methane and then burns it to create renewable energy. And I'll go into a little more detail about that. But thank you for setting the groundwork with that and so many other initiatives that you took part in. So, one of the things the ways we have to approach things in local government is we work with what we have. We're not the federal government, we're not the state government. There's certain things we can't impact, but we're also the unit of government where the rubber hits the road. So we use the approach of the art of the possible. We look at what can we do given the tools that we have, and it turns out that's a lot. And so, for example, we've done things like we've done an analysis countywide of all the county government facilities for energy efficiency. And we've devoted literally millions and millions of dollars to energy efficiency upgrades. Now, not only does that help the environment and reduce greenhouse gases, but it creates jobs and it saves taxpayer dollars. So it's a win-win-win for not only local government, but for anyone who invests in energy efficiency. And you can do that now. The technology exists, the technical assistance exists. It's really low-hanging fruit. So once we finished there, we surveyed all of our buildings to see if they could accept renewable energy. And right now we are up to 17 different county facilities that have received solar arrays on them. And then in addition to that, we looked at the land we had to see if any of that would be suitable for renewables. So first we found a 60-acre parcel on airport land where right now, through a partnership with MG&E, we're constructing an 8-megawatt solar farm next to the airport. And so just an example of how this is so doable and has so many benefits is that this initiative right now, instead of spending the money on fossil fuels where you might as well be lighting the money directly with a match because it goes away and you never see it again, through this partnership, county government is not having to invest a dime. MG&E is building the facility. They will own it on our land as we speak. There are construction workers, electricians, laborers, et cetera, out there working and building this facility. So the dollars that are going into it are going into the pockets of local workers and recirculating in our local economy. And particularly now, as we're dealing with COVID and the impacts to our economy, these types of jobs locally are more important than ever. And so as far as the taxpayers are concerned, part of the partnership and the deal we made with MG&E, we said, okay, we have this land, we'll lease it to you at market rate. And if you build this solar farm, we promise we'll buy every bit of electricity it generates. So this gives them a risk-free investment. It's easy for them to run the numbers. And then we said, oh, by the way, we'd like to pay less than we're paying for electricity now. And they crunched the numbers and said, okay. So in the first year alone, county taxpayers are going to save approximately $180,000 on our electric bill because of this project alone. Now, the next project we're pivoting to is some land we just bought next to our landfill, where we'll be partnering with another utility, with Alliant Energy, to develop a solar field about twice as big as that solar field. And once that's complete, all of Dane County government will have achieved 100% renewable offset for the electricity we generate in all of the buildings that we occupy. Now, we were there, actually, when I took office, we were there because, again, because of Kathleen's foresight, we were taking methane generated at the landfill and burning that to generate renewable electricity. We had generators out there. Now, the challenge that came upon us is that, as the good news is, solar and wind prices decreased, but what that did is it made it too expensive for the utilities to want to buy, in relationship to that, our renewable electricity from the landfill. So we pivoted. We knew that we weren't going to be able to make it work economically anymore. So we looked for alternatives. And thanks to really the brilliant staff that we have working in county government, they brought an idea to us that we could be the first in the nation local unit of government to construct a facility that would take the methane gas generated from our landfill, that we collect from the landfill, again, a very powerful greenhouse gas, take it, clean it, and compress it, and inject it into the natural gas pipeline that, fortunately for us, literally runs through the property at the landfill, and sell it as bio-CNG, so renewable compressed natural gas, to be used in transportation fuel. And other than 100% solar generated electricity, bio-CNG is the cleanest transportation fuel available. So we went ahead and we made the investment of over a $25 million investment to build a plant at the landfill that takes that methane gas, compresses it, and we sell it to Quick Trip, who dispenses it through their stores. So not only, again, are we offsetting, even to a greater extent than by burning the methane for electricity, offsetting greenhouse gases, but because of that investment and because of renewable energy credits and the money that we'll receive from selling that gas, we will be generating several $1 million annually for taxpayers that will replace what otherwise would have been taxpayer funded services. So, you know, there are really so many things one can do, and units of government can do, and businesses can do, that make sense financially and get us where we need to be as far as offsetting greenhouse gases. So I'm really excited about what we've done, because so many times, as you knew when you pushed for the development of that first manure digester, Kathleen, people are afraid to take that first step. There's a reason why no other unit of government in the country had developed a facility like we have at the landfill to take that natural gas and turn it into vehicle fuel, because it's a risk, it's expensive. But now we've done it. And so we have the blueprint. We give over 150 tours of the landfill every year and share technical assistance. And then we took that technology for compressing the natural gas and we made it available to our local manure digesters. We built a special port where compressed natural gas can be trucked in and unloaded, because our digesters are facing the same challenge that we did at the landfill because of that buyback rate for their electricity. So one of them has already changed and built a little mini factory that cleans and compresses their gas and brings it in, and they sell it through our pipeline. What this has done is it has made manure digesters much more economically advantageous, and it increases our opportunity to attract more partners to come in and build more digesters in Dane County, not only help offset greenhouse gases, but to also help clean up our lakes. So there's so much exciting work that you can do as a local unit of government. And now we've, through the office you mentioned, the Office of Energy and Climate Change, we've convened a local climate change council that includes people from throughout the county, local units of government, utilities, environmental organizations, et cetera. And we're cooperating and working with them on implementing a plan to drastically reduce greenhouse gases throughout the community, throughout different industries, through technical assistance and information and positive reinforcement through an award we're going to be giving for climate champions. So there's so much that we can do, and there's so much that we have done. We have a great track record. We're not going to slow down. As you can probably tell, I'm incredibly passionate about this issue, and I'm incredibly optimistic about it. And that's not to say we don't realize the seriousness of it. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about it is because it is such an incredibly serious challenge that's facing our country. And as you mentioned, not only our country, our nation, the people who contribute the least to climate change are impacted the greatest. And so we have a responsibility to our communities right now, to people globally right now, and certainly to future generations, to our children, to make sure that we get on board and do the right thing, because we know what we have to do. All we have to do is go out there and do it. So again, thank you for including me today and allowing me to come on and talk about some of the things that we're so excited about that we want to share, so that other folks look and say, hey, look what they're doing in Dane County, and pick up the phone and call us and allow us to help them on a path to decarbonization.
Well, Joe, you make it sound easy, and I know that it is anything but. So big kudos to you for your political leadership, your staff for their smarts, and to the farmers and the utilities and the businesses, all who said they were willing to take a risk and try doing something different. So I think you need to go on the road. This show needs to go on the road.
I'd love to. It's easier nowadays because we're virtual.
Don't we know? You know, I think you've seen now our listeners, who I know are themselves, probably most of them, experts on climate change, right? And they have been soldiering for years. And probably a part of the efforts of any of our four distinguished guests here. And yet I suspect, like me, they once in a while pause thinking, am I spending my time in the right spot? Is it better, should we all be focusing on one strategy in the hopes that 100 million people working together will lift that boat? Or is it best and more effective for all of us to be doing these different but very effective tasks? And so I'm going to throw that open to you smart heads. What is the best way? Should we all be in the same boat, or rowing in the same direction but in different boats? And then let me make it harder. Help the people that aren't in any boat. Me, and I'll take full responsibility for this, in the green movement over the last 50 years have been woefully slow to include racial diversity in the makeup of our organizations or our missions. And so let me make it even harder. What about those that aren't in a boat at all yet? Greg, you want to start us
It's
off?
pretty straightforward to me. I think we need both and all of those things. For a lot of the points that, that we've heard, Madeleine talked about durability already. So we need policy or efforts that are going to last for decades. Elizabeth talked about a natural gas plant that's going to be in place for 50 years if it gets built. And then we're hearing about, some of the efforts to go from one administration to another in Dane County. These decisions last for a long time. And so, there's sometimes this idea that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and we should, when the window opens, we've got to get that legislation passed or have that movement really engage everyone. But this is a long-term thing, and it's going to take some effort to get it going. But we're going to have to sustain it for decades for all these reasons. And so if you look back at, environmental policies that have worked and lasted, the Clean Air Act, dealing with acid rain, dealing with particulates, it's when there's been broad consensus that this is something we need to do. And maybe not everybody was on board at the beginning, but there was a lot of different segments that were on board. And so this idea that we might bring environmental justice into the discussion, I think was resisted for quite a long time because it was seen as something that makes the problem harder. It's hard enough already to transform our energy system, to make these hard decisions, maybe to charge more for energy. That's another problem that we can deal with maybe separately. But I think with the discussion of the Green New Deal and some of the youth movements and the Black Lives Matter movements, now you start to think, well, maybe some of these things actually do fit together. Maybe you do need to have some of the social programs that go with the Green New Deal to have such a big transformation so that people can move around to where the jobs are and not lose their health care, for example. Or maybe you need to bring some of these voices that haven't been part of the environmental movement in. It expands it, but also those, like we said, are where a lot of the impacts happen because of environmental justice issues. And also the poor spend more of their income on energy than the rich do. And so in a way, they have a bigger stake. So yeah, I tend to take a pretty broad view of this, that we need kind of a bigger picture view in order to do something that's durable and lasts.
Madeleine, Elizabeth?
I suspect there's a lot of unanimity here on we need to do all of these things. Elizabeth talked about there's roles for everybody no matter what you bring to it. As I opened with, I can only be comfortable being as focused as I am, knowing that groups like the Sierra Club is out there doing a broad range of things. That in a sense frees me up to be very focused. So, and there's so much that needs to be done. So allowing multiple things to happen is good. That said, I think there are moments when people should really look seriously at coming together behind certain things. So if there's a push to close a coal plant or a refinery that is in a poor neighborhood and polluting people's lives, I think my members will want to get out there and support that. They are kind of multi-angle people, actually, even though they're focused in Citizens Climate Lobby. And if there's a point where legislation is moving federally, we should look really carefully at uniting behind that to push it over the top. And that will take some negotiation. That won't be easy, but I think that there are moments when we want to come together, but while continuing to work in a diversity of ways.
I absolutely agree. Many boats, and every single person should be in a boat. And so I absolutely agree. And I don't think we can have this conversation without having environmental justice at it and without having people of color and low-income communities part of the solution. Executive Parisi mentioned that his staff who were working on the ground are the ones who came up with the solution of what to do with the gas. That's because people know best their area of expertise, where they live, what they know. So we need these communities that are already impacted because they have pipelines in them or they have coal plants causing air pollution to be in a boat telling us this policy will work or this won't work or this has some unintended consequences you didn't think about, but this program isn't accessible to everybody. So we absolutely need everybody in a boat. And one of the other, I guess I call it silver lining to climate change, is if we're switching our economy from really a fossil fuel-based economy to a clean energy economy, I think Greg mentioned everything's changing. That means we can work together to address some of these other systemic problems, right? This systemic racism, income inequality. We can target the jobs programs and economic development to the neighborhoods and the people who are most marginalized and oppressed. We can really target the solutions to create a better system when we come, so not just one that's livable when we come out on the other side of it, but one that's better for everyone.
Well, I want to give some kudos to Sierra Club too, because on a national level, you have, your organization has really embraced racial diversity as one of the big green leaders to try to be much more cognizant in terms of hiring practices within the organization and in terms of its mission. So kudos. Let's turn to maybe a more nitty-grittier question for you all. There's a lot of uniformity here in thinking about carbon pricing as a vehicle here to the climate change solution. So what would that mean? At a local level, at a state level, at a federal level, about how government can build that into its everyday decision making. I know Joe has certainly thought about that a lot, but so have you others. And for the same question for businesses that are part of this conversation listening, what can they do to build carbon pricing into their day-to-day decisions? So government and business. I'm going to get to us real people in a moment. Practical matter. Let me give an example just to start the conversation, but you know, there's a carbon reduction payback from paying farmers to grow carbon sequestering crops that also help prevent erosion of our streams. There's a way to put a number on that. Is there a way to put a number on a highway expansion and versus transit, bus transit? So just to get the juices flowing, how do we incorporate into federal, state, local government policy and businesses?
I mean, I think what Madeleine's working on in Citizens Climate Lobby is working on putting a price on carbon would go a long way, and working with the federal Congress to do that. But what you see in other places are kind of these shadow prices, or kind of not real prices that have to be paid, but prices that affect decision making. So companies will say, okay, we're going to think about our long-term investments. We don't know what the policy will be in 2030 or 2040, but our investments are going to be relevant then, the investments we make today. So let's put a number and say there's probably some dollar we'll have to pay for the carbon emissions in 2025 or 2030. So companies can come up with a number like $20 or $50. There was a bill in the state assembly that said the Public Service Commission would have to put a number on new investments like this gas plant that Elizabeth mentioned in Superior of $50 a ton. And so that's not that they have to pay that, but if the Public Service Commission commissioners are deciding is this a good idea or not for ratepayers and for the state's energy needs, does it make sense when you have to pay $50 for every ton of emissions that goes into the atmosphere? So I think some of those prices can matter and affect decision making before they have to actually pay those amounts. And businesses and governments that want to get ahead of things and not be stuck with stranded assets, not be stuck with a hundreds of $1 million gas plant and not be able to run it because they can't afford to anymore because there's a price on those emissions. That's what we want to avoid as ratepayers, as citizens, and businesses similarly. So I think having some prices even before they have to pay that price is a good way to get investments going in the right direction.
I like that also for all the reasons you said, and it's really nice to go into a lobby meeting with a member of Congress, with somebody from a business that's already doing shadow carbon pricing, because what they're saying is we're already planning for this, so Congress, go ahead and enact it. It's a great form of support for actually getting the legislation through. And I think it's a way to short circuit some of the infrastructure decisions that go down the wrong path, as Elizabeth was talking about, by getting people to price it now.
Can you give us an example, Madeleine?
Probably they can better than I, yeah.
Some company that's doing this, or?
I mean, ExxonMobil, who's often held up as one of like the worst actors on climate change, has been doing it at a low level at something like $10 for the last decade or so. So it shows that even people that don't want a carbon price to happen, which they may not, or at least they don't want a high price to happen, are being very realistic and saying, well, it may happen and our investments are going to be long lasted, and So we need to take that into account as well.
I think we're also seeing huge investors and banks pulling out of fossil fuels because they see whether the writing's on the wall for a carbon tax or just activism is working and keeping, Keystone XL or these other plants from being built, and it's no longer the solid investment it was. I mean, giant companies like BlackRock pulling out of these because they see that it's not the direction and it's not the future.
Bill, you want to speak to that? In terms of carbon pricing?
So, I'd also like to see this approached, and it's probably happening simultaneously, kind of from the other direction also. There's the whole piece of this that we haven't talked about that has to do with subsidies that fossil fuels companies receive now, be it cheap land leases or other subsidies, write-offs, et cetera. And, and what does that cost? How much does that cost the federal treasury just in dollars alone annually? And I think that's an important piece for us all to keep sight of. We all, this is kind of an answer to your last question too. We all have our passions in our different areas in which we focus. And I think we should, be driven by our passions. Mine happens to be, being project-based by looking at my community and saying, okay, I want to increase solar power. I want to increase efficiency. I want to offset greenhouse gases. What kind of partnerships can I bring together to make those happen in a short amount of time? And thank goodness there are people whose passion is lobbying Congress and lobbying the state legislature, because that's a whole another set. So while we don't really look at, the carbon tax impact or cost, in that specific of a way, we look at the cost that it has on our community and on our environment. And to a certain extent, and there might be people on this panel more familiar with the intricacies of this than I, but there is a type of carbon tax program in California through which people buy a type of they have to buy renewable energy credits. And so one of the ways that we make that you can make renewable projects more affordable is by selling those renewable energy credits, some of which are generated through California legislation, which, and so for the county, for example, for our offsetting, we are doing everything we can. We're exhausting energy efficiency and renewables to get to our 100%. And if we end up being a little short, we will buy some renewable energy credits for a renewable project that's going up. But our condition on that will be, we don't want to buy some cheap credits at the tail end of a project that's already up and running. We will want to buy credits that will be responsible for getting a new project up and off the ground to make sure that it's actually creating a tangible offset.
We've now spent 45 minutes or so talking about what government can do, what businesses can do, what utilities can do, what everybody else can do but us. So why don't we spend our last few minutes talking about what each of us can do, who's actually the source of the climate change problem. What can we each do? What's your best few guidances for us? Madeleine, start us off.
Okay, I'm happy to jump in there. All right. Well, first of all, you won't be surprised to hear me say this. Hold Congress accountable. Don't write them off.
I'd be disappointed if you didn't say that.
Don't write them off. Write to them. Call them. Tweet at them. Just talk to them about supporting either the legislation I'm working on or the Green New Deal, or, Congress has to take charge of this. So that's the first thing.
You get one more.
I get one more? Vote. Get everybody you know to vote. I'm going to give you two for that price. Talk to people about climate change. We don't talk about it enough. If they share your views, get them to take one step themselves. If they don't share their views, see if you can listen and ask and listen and try not to put them down and look for common ground. You might move them over time.
Good advice. Greg.
Yeah, I think three things. One, as an individual, find things that you can do yourself that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Two, talk to someone. It could be a neighbor, it could be a relative. I totally agree with Madeleine about that. And then three, it really picks up on something Elizabeth mentioned earlier. Use your talents. Find out what it is you do. And if it's an artist, there's things you can do as an artist. If you're a project developer, there's things you can do in terms of projects. If you're talking to people, there's things. If you work in media, that's a question I get from students increasingly is, what can I do And I just love getting that question because that's the answer. Figure out what you like to do, what you're good at, and the problem is big enough that there'll be space for you to make a contribution.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of things people can do, individually, but our job, I think, is to make the right choice the easy choice, and society will just move. So you can't tell people they should be taking the bus instead of driving if it takes them an hour and a half to get to work on our transit system. So I think get in a boat. That's what everybody should do. Get in one of those boats, figure out which boat you want to be in and how you want to do it, and just get involved. And then absolutely 100% agree with Madeleine, vote. It makes a huge difference.
Joe, one or two top?
Hey, so get a copy of the book Drawdown. It has the top 100 things we can do to reduce climate change, and then follow your passion. Be driven by your passions. It can be anything from installing an LED light bulb to a host of other things. One of the fascinating things I found about this book, and the deeper you dig into the challenges of climate change, is it's not just what appear to be, quote, environmental solutions that need to happen in order to combat climate change. Helping to educate young women globally contributes to greenhouse gas reductions. And there's so many things that we can do that provide social justice and economic justice at the same time. But educate yourself. Again, the book Drawdown is a great place to start, and be driven by your passions because you can make a difference.
As you know, listeners, we've just heard a lot of hope from our four fabulous guests here. They all started out speaking hopefully, and they have ended speaking hopefully. And we are at an end. And I will conclude by saying I am hopeful. One of the things I get to do right now these days is to teach grad students who want to be change agents. And so every day I get a dose of hope because they are on fire and they are fabulous. And the next generation will do better than my generation, and so it goes. So thank you, listeners, for joining us. Thank you to the fabulous panel for your insights and wisdom. And I hope we all go out and take action because our world depends upon it. Thank you.
Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.